Welcome to Right Rose, Magdalene Rose, and today my guest is Tony Kinnett, a national correspondent for the Daily Signal. Thank you so much for coming on.
Happy to be here.
So I wanted to talk to you because in the media world, we're obviously in the conservative world dealing with the assassination of Charlie Kirk and how that plays out. And because Charlie had such a role in media and youth organization, everything across the board, I wanted to ask you to start off with what has this effect been like in the conservative media world, primarily in like the video area of it?
I would say that first and foremost, a lot of individuals who knew Charlie, it's really put them in a daze. I would say that you can see a lot of broadcasts, mine included, over the last week and a half that have just, there's been a bit of a fog. Some things have been just a bit more raw. And the reason I bring that up is that there has been a lot of criticism of the on edge nature of some of the broadcasters who were apparently supposed to sing Kumbaya around the fire after this occurred instead of reacting to a friend, and not to mention one who's got kids the same age as mine, that was gunned down. That changes a lot. Across the broader ecosystem, though, it's galvanized the mission for a lot of us, especially when there's a lot of tut-tutting from the moderates that, oh, you're taking this too seriously, or well, you need to play by these super special rules. And I think that while there used to be in the kind of right wing media ecosystem and understanding that we kind of allowed that tut-tutting from kind of the high horse crowd. Now that's no longer something that a lot of people in the right wing ecosystem tend to. And then unfortunately, a last little section, there are some who are directly grifting off of his assassination and are just making things up about his life and about
Yeah.
his work, which is deeply insulting.
It is, and I've seen sort of the conservative world really show its stripes, the different
Hmm.
factions of it over this
Well
period of
put.
time. Yeah, and I wanted to know in terms of the before Kirk and the after Kirk, I think before Charlie Kirk came onto the scene, there was a lot of disorganization in the young conservative world. We had different groups, but nothing had been streamlined together. And I think one of his greatest things was streamlining that together and making it so that there was an outlet for a lot of young voices. Now, after his assassination, and yes, his wife has stepped in, and that's great, but there's a big gap there of his presence to fill. How does the conservative media world look in this new world where we're afraid, first of all, I think a lot of people to step out and have a voice and say things, but we're also in constant mourning? What does this play out like in the next year or so?
So I don't necessarily think that you're going to see an maybe afraid. I'd say circumspect, observant, aware is something taking things more seriously. Less outdoor events, but more events in general is probably going to be likely. I maybe I'll clarify. I won't maybe pushback isn't the right word. After the 2024 election, Jen Psaki, the Circleback Queen herself, went on with Jon Stewart onto a little podcast, and she whined like a petulant child for about 35 minutes over how in the right wing ecosphere for media, we do something the left doesn't do. And there's a lot of things that we understand the left usually does well. They're usually in lockstep with messaging, right? We all remember the clip from COVID of all of the media broadcasters saying the exact same
Hmm.
pre-prepared talking points. But what we're doing right now is a really great example. You are having me on your show. This isn't the first time that you've done so. There are a lot of us that have been on each other's shows. We amplify each other's work. You know, if something from the Rose area of journalism and coverage came across my desk and I found it to be interesting because we're marching towards a general goal, we believe in these
Yeah.
ideals of traditional America, then I would amplify it. And the same with whether it's the Turning Point ecosphere that Charlie headed up wonderfully, or the Tim Pool, or the Daily Wire, or the Daily Caller crew, and all the way from, you know, Tucker Carlson to Sean Hannity to Ted Cruz to, I mean, just there's a massive ecosystem. We've all amplified each other's work. And I think now that actually becomes maybe not streamlined under a central organization, but it does become a necessity to fuel the development of the future generations of the GOP, which coincidentally enough, and I'm sorry to be long winded in this answer,
No problem.
uh, the chapter head for TPUSA, or the guy who kind of oversees it for Indiana, that's where I broadcast out of. He came by the studio the week before Charlie was shot. And we were talking, brainstorming about holding events where young Republicans, YAF, the Turning Point USA chapters and other young groups on the right could get together and work together in the state because there's nothing for developing
Yeah.
the youth here. Now I see that all happening under Turning Point. I think everyone's going to chip into that. Our show is going to start supporting Turning Point. You've seen a lot of other various groups on the right supporting Turning Point. There has never been a bigger amount of momentum for developing the next generation of conservatism. We haven't seen that since Newt Gingrich in the 90s.
Yeah. I think that's very true. And the Newt Gingrich resurgence was really because he was willing to speak to the grassroots and bring the grassroots into DC. And now we have another version of the utilization of grassroots across the country, but integrated into mainstream conservative media, which is a hard
Very
thing to
aptly
do.
put.
Yeah, it's
Very
a
aptly
very
put.
hard, thank you. It's a very hard thing to do. And I think one of the things that I've sort of wondered about in this sort of era where we're understanding the danger that we're actually in. Those voices on the right who kind of wanted Erica Kirk to come out and sing everything was going to be okay 2 days after her husband was shot and she lost the father to her young children. Those conservatives that are in the constant state of criticizing for us being too harsh or too upset, do you think that they have a point or a place within conservatism right now in terms of the messaging of this moment, or are they out of touch?
So, for a long time, as a young education writer, I was a teacher and then I worked in administration. I was in Governor Walker's office for a little while in Wisconsin, working in education policy. And I've always had kind of a knack for understanding the value of the more establishmentarian wing of the Republican Party
Hmm.
and the populist wing of the party. And then I would also argue have two other micro factions being the traditional conservatives and then the more
Yeah,
libertarian-y wing of the party. And all four of those factions really do need to work together. They all do have something to offer. However, I'm seeing more and more people in the establishmentarian wing of the party, the corporatist wing, Bushian wing, probably more accurate than neocon, although that's often attributed to these kind of individuals.
yeah,
They are also galvanized in anger. A lot of them have decided enough is enough after the
yeah,
assassination of Charlie Kirk. Some of them have actually, who have, called him Alex Jones light during his time, have now gone back and said, wait a minute, I've watched his videos now for the first
yeah,
time. And they're upset that they didn't watch him more. And by the way, I met Charlie Kirk before I'd ever actually really watched a ton of his content. So to actually see organically this revivification of right wing unity, it's good. Now, do the establishmentarians, like those that are tutting and saying, let's not be too hasty, do they have a point right now? No. And those that are doing so are being rightly mocked and scorned. Those that are
hmm,
saying, now, hold on now, let's not get carried away here. Don't want, when the left gets in power, they're going to. There are too many that have receipts that recognize right now, no. Kamala Harris promised to pack the Supreme Court, to
yep,
add states to the union in fiat, permanently change the balance of the Senate. Promised not just to use the FTC, but the SEC and the FTC, multiple branches promised to use it directly. You had Democrat officials calling for censorship, using censorship, blackmailing Facebook, denying the Kroger Albertsons merger because of food deserts and other nonsense. The Biden administration already did this and was promising more. Miss me with that nonsense. I don't have time for that kind of goofy garbage. Take your pearls, clutch them elsewhere. We have work to do.
I agree with that. And I think the sentiment of we have work to do is very true because we have various lanes that Kirk built and occupied. And I think the discussion around who is the next Charlie Kirk, it's not a commentator. It's not somebody who's just going to be an organizer. You have to find people who can fill all of those roles. And you mentioned the sort of period of time of viciousness from the Biden administration. And I think people have forgotten the level of terror people were living under. And I saw a clip from Kirk saying basically if Trump didn't win 2024, he felt he himself could be facing prison because he'd be persecuted like so many other people on the right had been.
Now we find out that that's true. The FBI,
Yes.
through Arctic Frost or whatever they were calling that, were actively looking into Kirk
Yeah.
and to TPUSA. So that wasn't an unfounded kind of schizophrenic fear.
No, it wasn't. And I think a lot of people had that sentiment who were just commentators who didn't offer an organizational advantage to the RNC. So now, in terms of like the politics after this, what are the types of Republican candidates that we should be looking for on the younger side who are getting their start in politics? Is there an archetype that we want them to fit or a sort of general baseline? Because I think that's that next wave of leaders that he had influence over, they have to be ready to fight.
So that's the right question. And the answer is a little bit more complicated, but that's why it's really important. So there was this argument. The ideal political candidate for a young individual in the late 90s, early aughts was a news broadcaster or a pundit. The
Yeah.
idea that you would have someone who was really good at speaking, who did enough research to understand the issues. A lot of people don't know, just as a candidate who I wasn't particularly fond of. Carrie Lake was a news broadcaster
Yeah.
in Arizona, and one who there was an amazing auto tune from the Shmoyohu guys of, and that's another story for another time. But in the modern political movement, I don't think that the broadcaster is the ideal candidate anymore. And I say this as
Hmm.
someone who has been encouraged to run for Congress here in Indiana 6th. I've seen other colleagues of mine who have run in primaries, who are well known online in various places and lose badly on the left that are getting their butts kicked for the same
Yeah.
reason. And I don't think the influencer candidate is a thing. I don't think they should be a thing. There's a good reason why. Just because you are passionate about something does not make you a good candidate. You
Yeah.
need to know how the position works. The reason I say this, there are a couple of states right now who, in the last 10 years, have been taken over in their Republican parties. The establishment wing lost control. Now the populists are running it. And what you are getting is some good things and a lot of awful things. You're getting, for example,
Yeah.
in Indiana, an incredibly allegedly corrupt Secretary of State who ran just by telling people, I'm going to do really good voter ID stuff and election integrity. And we said, yeah, that's
Yeah.
something we want. So they voted him in. Now he's got a lot of problems. I don't like it when I see people in Congress who don't know how the position works and are embarrassing me as the, radio TV host. I have to get
Yeah.
out there and argue why we should vote for a Republican when the Republican's up there honking their nose and stroking their rainbow wig. So it's a really weird balance. You need someone who's smart enough to run the position, but also not like a wonk who's just going to get in there and sell
Yeah.
everyone out. You
Yeah.
need some high standards.
And that's interesting because Democrats are also dealing with this, where they have people who were
Mm,
Twitch streamers, who are on Discord,
right.
professional influencers. There's one in Arizona. There's one named Kat, who has a very long last name, who I think was just sort of in a scuffle with ICE agents today or yesterday. And they are dealing with a group of young people who have absolutely no ideological basis. They are very weak on even studying policy to the point where I've seen reporting from Politico and other sources that there's frustration within the DNC about a knowledge gap of basic economic structures. And
Yep.
I don't want that to happen on the right. I don't want us to look like fools who are running people because they trend on TikTok. So that archetype, I think one of the things we should be looking for is people who can build small businesses who then get involved on a local level and can go up. Do you think that that sort of idea is pervasive enough in the Republican Party, or are we still struggling to find our identity of who the next generation of young conservative political leaders should be?
So I wouldn't say we're struggling to find yet. Natural talent always rises to the top. The thing
Yeah.
that, so I, as a 95er, so the very last of the millennials, July of 96 being the cutoff for Gen Z, I am coming to grips with the understanding that people who are JD Vance's age are those who need to be in politics. You
Yeah.
do not need to see someone in their 20s in the House of
Hmm.
Representatives. They're not smart. I
Yep.
am just now 30 years old as of this year, and I am not in a position where I should. I ran a nonprofit for a year. I wasn't prepared to run a big education nonprofit for a year. How Charlie and I talked to him about this when I was doing that. I don't know how he did it as well as he did it, and he would tell me he just avoided making some mistakes purely by the grace of God. And
Yeah.
I think that that comes to the aspect of who we run now, that just because someone's out there and they're very loud and boisterous does not equate to being a good governance individual. And by the way, this is why I said that I wanted Laura Trump not to be the person for whom now Michael Whatley is running for that Senate
Yeah.
seat. I said, I want Laura Trump. If I had my druthers, I'd have her running the RNC
Yeah.
now because
Yeah.
she's good at campaigning. And I think we have this weird idea in American society that Congress is the nobility class. And, well, if you really want to be
It's
an
not.
influential, you need to be in Congress. No, the
No.
most influential people should not be in government. I make way more impact where I am right now with the senators and administration staff on both sides that tune into the show
Yeah.
rather than me sitting in Congress and being accused of taking bribery from someone because unknowingly Eli Lilly donated to my campaign. And so supposedly now I'm owned by the pharmaceutical industry. It's And that witch hunt, by the way, is what will probably cripple Republicans
Yeah.
most in the next 5 years because it this idea that everyone right now is selling out to everyone all the time.
Yeah.
It sometimes yes, but sometimes no. But you know, when you smell blood in the water, sometimes suddenly Fisher friends, not food, goes out the window.
And that's true. And there's sort of a weaponization of everyone being bought and everyone being corrupt. And everyone is not bought and everyone is not corrupt. And sometimes people are just independent streamers and there isn't a giant controversy that's being hidden in an Epstein file. And that's something people don't really want to accept. They don't want to see the truth of that. So in this new media world, what is the best way rather you think for younger people to break into it if they don't want to be in the congressional land? Like, what does that pipeline look like? Because for Democrats, it's kind of a mess right now. There isn't a clear youth advisory director. They had swap outs in their leadership there. So, what is our pipeline now?
I can actually say this in a way that is from experience. In 2016, Cassie Dillon, now Cassie Kiva, founded this thing called the Lone Conservative, and it was this
Yeah, I
little
remember
blog
that.
writing outlet.
Yeah,
And I wrote for it for a while, and so
yeah,
did a lot of people who have gone on to do incredible things. I mean, Greg Price is doing incredible stuff with like the administration, and then you have so many other incredible alumni from that organization that are doing really, really big stuff now. And now Lone Conservative is no longer active, but TPUSA did the same kind of thing. There are other outlets and blogs and kind of an ecosystem of ways for people to get involved. You need to learn to write because writing forces you to read.
yeah,
This is where Candace Owens fell on her face. Candace Owens can broadcast, but she can't
yeah,
read. And I know that her husband has a little book club that he does, but she doesn't actually get out there and research topics before
yeah,
she speaks. She just goes over a couple social media posts. If you write, if you practice writing articles, if you practice researching and writing, that forces you to understand and learn how things work. And that's coming from a guy who had some good articles and some trash, some horrible articles that were mocked and rightly so, that forced me back to the drawing board.
yeah,
And that's a pipeline that I think there's a rumor that Lone Conservative may be relaunching. We'll see. But I'm not just advocating for that organization in any way. I mean, that would be the ideal
yeah,
pipeline. Right now, the current pipeline that exists in the last 2 years, which is the influencer pipeline, I think is really detrimental to the party
yeah.
because advancing actually things that help people is not selling vitamin supplements and Shein links, but actually getting people not just participating in, oh, I got this video of somebody doing something wrong. That there's more to it than that. And I think
Yeah.
that's something we are growing out of naturally, albeit with a few growing pains.
And that's an interesting point because although the idea that someone was born who was in politics starting out in 2017 and what someone starting out now doesn't seem like that big of a gap of time in the young conservative world, I think it's epic because I remember starting in 2017 and you had to work much harder. You had to do
Yeah.
unpaid internships. I did that. I did all of that.
Now no
And
one wants to do unpaid
no one wants to
internships.
do that. No one wants to be mentored. Nobody wants that. And now it's sort of like, well, I'm just going to go viral in this way. And even people I speak to who I'm like, you should maybe plan out your video before you post it. You should put some bullet points down. They sort of say to me, well, that's not authentic enough. And I think you can be authentic and also do some pre-planning. And it doesn't make you like cringy. And that's a weird sentiment people have now.
There's also a very weird ecosystem that I'm not going to be able, out of respect for some colleagues that are now in the industry. There was a time when money was being thrown into this lock, stock, and barrel. And if you were essentially an upstart who went viral, you could have a ton of money thrown at you.
Yeah.
And it was insane.
Yeah.
I have told my production team quite a bit about the bonkers nature of that if you just went viral at the right time, you could, I mean, even in the first few days of the Ministry of Truth account on X, which I run in my goofy time, I had people sending me tweets that were offering $500 to me to retweet it. That is
Yeah.
just stupid. That's
Yeah.
just dumb. Now that's kind of ending. And now
Yeah.
the money is going back into more traditionally measured forms of donation advocacy.
Hmm.
So I think that the age of going viral and famous is also kind of starting to come to maybe not an end, but the light at the end of the tunnel. That's good for
Yeah.
society because the social media in a lot of ways is a cancer.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And one of the things that I've seen quite often is this sort of archetype of what a young conservative, either man or woman, is. And it freaks me out when I can't tell them apart because they all look the same and they all look exactly or the same in their ideas as well. So now that we're sort of in this era where I think we're going to see a massive surge of young conservatives, and I think we're going to see that in print and media and all of that. How do we as an audience sort of filter out the people who are giving good content and the people who are just sort of plugging along because they didn't get into drama school?
Oh, well, the answer to that actually is remarkably simple. And this is when I was a teacher, I was criticized by some other older teachers why I acted the way that I'm acting now. I do not act differently depending on whom I'm around, with a very, very few exceptions. Number one, because the ADHD is so aggressive that I don't have the, short-term memory to keep track of different personas. But number two, students in middle school, they could recognize fake in an instant. And it's one of the things that led to Teacher of the Year awards, is that I was forced to work with what I have. I didn't fake things to impress people. And that's not just true with middle school or high school students. You can recognize fake. You know what fake smells like. You know it. You actually browse some X accounts that are only ever retweeting and posting certain things. You recognize what is that? That one episode of a later season of SpongeBob, which now I guess probably would make it an earlier season of SpongeBob, where Krabs gets the Krabby Patty bought out from under him, and it's this like weird TGI Fridays thing where they're selling these gray slop
Yes.
Krabby Patties.
Yes.
This guy takes a bite out of the Krabby Patty and it looks pretty on the outside. And then he stops and he looks down at the inside and it's this gray sludgy mass. And
Yeah.
then everyone freaks out. If you actually look at the content you're browsing and the videos you're watching, you'll recognize pretty quickly those who are making the thumbnails and things, if it's a guy, it's the shocked face. If it's a girl, there's cleavage somewhere in the photo. I mean, that kind of old style
Yeah.
fakeness is prevalent in other kinds of AI edited and generated content now. It is something people recognize. The other way I would say is that people do get the reputation they deserve over time.
Yeah.
They always do in one way or another. And I was asked a question recently about how some of these individuals who were saying crazy things before Charlie Kirk's assassination, how would they get found out? How would they get the reputation they've earned over time? And the answer was now they are coming out to say, well, actually it was Mossad who killed Charlie.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
Nick Fuentes of all
I
people,
know. I
and by the
know.
way, who also wrote for Lone Conservative before he was
I
kicked out.
know.
Yeah, just the good and the bad, just to be clear,
Yeah.
think when Nick Fuentes is the one that comes out and pops the Candace Owens bubble,
Yeah.
like from the back. Now those same grifters are saying, "Oh, Nick Fuentes has been he's been bought out by Israel." Just for the
Yeah.
love of God, it's empty, it's shallow, and after a while, as a pundit and broadcaster who's not afraid to make predictions, we have a joke that we have like a Tony Kinnett was right jar, and I like a true Midwesterner. I'll say scoreboard. They have a lot of predictions that have never once come true. My
Yeah.
predictions either come true, they're very close, or I very clearly outline when I was wrong and why, because I
Yeah.
want to be right in the future. That's what I owe my audience. You don't need to teach people to do that. They end up recognizing that on their own.
I think that's very true. And I've noticed those clips of if Nick Fuentes is seen as the reasonable person in a conversation, perhaps the other commentator
Charlie
is a
Sheen and
little
Nick
off.
Fuentes being the guys who have a perspective on this right now is something I
Yeah.
didn't have on the bingo card,
No.
but I'm not going to look that gift horse in the mouth either.
No. I am certainly willing to embrace it. And I am also willing to embrace people finally maybe seeing the true madness that Candace Owens perpetuates really across the board. And just go ahead.
It's just self-obsessed laziness. As much as again, there's by the way, I say that as someone who recognizes, as Andrew Clavin pointed out quite clearly, very natural, charismatic talent. Very
Yes.
natural talent.
Yes.
But the first thing I learned whenever I guess hosted a 3 hour radio show, the Spec 4 had any kind of show at all, you find out within about 90 minutes, you can say everything you've ever said about politics
Yeah.
and then be out of things to say.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird. So you have to research past that, and you will either go to the social media easy buffet, or you'll have to do a little bit of mining and grind out those RuneScape levels and actually get something that's worthwhile.
And that's actually a lesson that I learned during one of my unpaid radio internships that I do not think people have access to anymore in the same way.
It's certainly something. And I'll say this, that nowadays I'm excited because those who do end up coming to the table for internships are a far higher quality person,
Yes.
and they end up getting paid and placed in far better places as a result.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And just to sort of cap us off, what is your advice for young conservatives at this point who want to be in politics? They feel inspired because there's a huge inspiration moment that we're having across the country. I think even internationally for young people. How can they first get involved to learn even where they're going to stand on the conservative ideological spectrum?
I'll say this first and foremost, if you're really interested about getting involved at all, you reach out to me. I don't care. You reach out. I have said multiple times that I am trying to get people to a place where they can make an impact and that we as conservatives need to raise up that next generation. So put my money where my mouth is. By all means, you can reach out. And even if I don't have enough time, that day things are crazy, insane traveling, we'll get back to you eventually and put you in the right place. There's a lot of organizations, you just don't know where they are. So we'll
Yeah.
put you in touch with those organizations or with those people or with those outlets, what have you, and we'll get you in the movement. That's,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the answer other than, passing you off to a third party, which, I might do. It just depends.
And I think that's very true. One of the best things I ever believed really for conservative leaders is just when they have their Twitter DMs open. It's just a very open thing and people can submit questions. And I've benefited just in that in my own learning for many, many years. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can people follow you to pay attention to what you're doing and listen to your show?
You can follow me on X at the Tonus, TheTonus. Don't ask, it's an old high school nickname. And then on YouTube or on Rumble, you search the Daily Signal. That's where the Tony Kinnett cast is every 7 p.m. weekday. It's a good time.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for coming on and thank you all for tuning in to Right Rose.